Picture this. A group of filthy, desperate humans huddled around a smoking fire, gnawing on scraps of half-cooked meat. Their clothes are rags. Their faces are gaunt. Every shadow might hide a predator. Every day is a brutal fight just to survive until tomorrow. This is how most of us imagine early human life. And we have good reason. In 1651, the philosopher Thomas Hobbes famously described the natural state of humanity as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. For centuries, this vision has shaped how we think about our ancestors. We picture them as barely surviving, working from dawn until dusk, constantly on the edge of starvation. But here's the thing. The evidence tells a completely different story. Archaeological research and studies of modern hunter-gatherers reveal something startling. Groups like the Kun-san of southern Africa work approximately 15 to 20 hours per week to meet all their needs. That's 3 to 5 hours per day. In 1966, anthropologist Marshall Solins proposed what he called the original affluent society thesis, arguing that hunter-gatherers were actually the most leisured people in human history. Think about that for a moment. Our ancestors living 30,000 years ago may have worked less than half the hours we do today. And here's where it gets interesting. If they weren't grinding away every waking hour just to survive, what were they doing with all that time? What filled those long afternoons and evenings around the fire? What occupied minds as sophisticated as ours, but unburdened by agriculture, cities, or 9-to-5 jobs? The answer might completely reshape how you think about human history, about progress itself, and about what it actually means to live well. Before we journey back to that world, share your city and time in the comments. There's something beautiful about knowing we're scattered across the globe, all curious about the same questions. If this kind of exploration speaks to you, consider subscribing. Now let's begin where all human days begin, with waking up. Picture this. Darkness still holds the world, but it's no longer the deep black of true night. The sky has begun its slow transformation from obsidian to charcoal to that peculiar shade of blue-gray that exists only in the hour before dawn. You're lying on soft grasses and animal hides, the warmth of other bodies close on either side. Perhaps a child is curled against your back, an elder's breathing, steady and deep, sounds from somewhere near your feet. And then, gradually, you become aware. Not jolted, not wrenched from sleep by a blaring alarm, just aware. Your eyes open to find others already stirring. Someone has already moved to the fire, coaxing last night's embers back to life. The smell of smoke drifts through the shelter. A baby fusses softly, and you hear the gentle shushing sounds of a mother settling the infant to nurse. Someone else stretches, joints popping quietly in the stillness. This is how humans woke up for hundreds of thousands of years. And it was nothing like how we wake up today. Here's the thing. For most of human history, the very concept of waking up was fundamentally different from our modern experience. We think of sleep as a single block of unconsciousness, something we fall into at night and emerge from in the morning, ideally 8 hours later. We set alarms to jar us from this state at a predetermined time, regardless of whether our bodies are ready. We pride ourselves on hitting the ground running, on productivity from the moment our feet touch the floor. But our ancestors didn't live this way. They couldn't have. And here's what's remarkable. The evidence suggests they didn't want to. In the early 1990s, historian Roger Ekirch began noticing something strange in his research on pre-industrial Europe. Again and again, in diaries, court records, medical texts, and literature spanning from ancient Rome through the early 19th century, he found references to first sleep and second sleep. Not just occasionally. Constantly. People would go to bed shortly after dark, sleep for 3 or 4 hours, then wake for an hour or two in the middle of the night. During this wakeful period, they would pray, talk with their bedfellows, tend to fires, or simply lie in quiet contemplation. Then they would return to their second sleep until dawn. Ekirch spent 16 years documenting over 500 references to this pattern before publishing his findings. He called it segmented sleep, or biphasic sleep. And it wasn't an aberration, it was the norm. Think about what that means. The 8-hour block of consolidated sleep that we consider natural and healthy? That's actually a modern invention, dating back only to the Industrial Revolution, when artificial lighting and factory schedules demanded we compress our rest into a single efficient block. Our biology, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, expects something different entirely. Studies of modern hunter-gatherers support this. The Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the last remaining groups to live primarily by hunting and gathering, don't use alarm clocks. They don't need to. Research shows they naturally wake around dawn, their sleep patterns synchronized with the rising sun. But their sleep isn't a solid block either. They drift in and out of lighter and deeper sleep throughout the night, with periods of wakefulness that they use for tending fires, checking on children, or simply resting quietly. Among the Hadza, sleep is communal. Groups of 25 to 50 individuals camp together, and at night, families cluster around fires. Children sleep pressed against their mothers until age 3 or 4. Elders rest near the center of the camp where the warmth is greatest. Young adults might sleep toward the periphery, their sharper senses serving as an early warning system for any disturbance. Consider this. In Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists have found evidence of communal living spaces dating back 75,000 years. The cave shows clear signs of organized sleeping areas, hearths positioned to provide warmth to multiple family groups, and tools stored in ways that suggest shared spaces and shared resources. These weren't isolated individuals or even isolated nuclear families. These were communities sleeping together, waking together, beginning their days together. The social nature of waking would have been profound. Imagine never experiencing that modern isolation of waking alone in a quiet house, fumbling for your phone, the first human voice you hear coming from a podcast or a video. Instead, you wake to the presence of your entire community. The baby you hear fussing might not be your own child, but you know that child, know their parents, have watched them grow since birth. The elder coughing softly near the fire taught you to track animals when you were young. The teenager stretching nearby will go on their first major hunt soon, and you'll be there to witness it. There was no privacy in our modern sense, but there was also no loneliness. As the sky continues to lighten, the camp comes alive with gentle activity. Not frantic, not rushed. There are no meetings to get to, no commute to catch, no boss expecting you at a certain time. The very concept of being late doesn't exist. How could it? Time is measured by the sun's position, by the seasons, by the moon's phases, not by minutes and hours. Someone feeds the fire, building it up now that day is approaching. The smoke rises straight in the still morning air. Others begin to move about, stepping away from the sleeping area to relieve themselves, splashing water on their faces from a nearby stream if one is close. The young mother settles herself comfortably and puts her infant to breast. Anthropological data shows that in hunter-gatherer societies, nursing happens on demand whenever the child indicates hunger. There are no schedules, no 3-hour intervals, no anxiety about whether the baby is eating enough or too much. The child nurses. And that's that. The absence of urgency is perhaps the most striking difference. Modern mornings are characterized by a kind of low-grade panic. We've overslept, or we haven't slept enough. We're running late. We need coffee to function. We rush through showers, gulp down breakfast, check our phones obsessively, our cortisol levels spiking as we prepare for the day's battles. But in a Paleolithic camp, cortisol rises naturally with the dawn, just as it should. This is how our endocrine system evolved to work. The hormone that helps us wake and become alert increases gradually as light levels rise, preparing our bodies and minds for activity. No jarring alarm to spike it artificially. No flood of stress hormones because we've slept through the alarm and now we're definitely going to be late. Just a gentle biological waking that aligns with the sun. And here's where it gets really interesting. That period of wakefulness in the middle of the night, the one Roger E. Kirch documented so thoroughly in pre-industrial societies, that wasn't just a quirk of European peasants. It appears to be deeply embedded in human biology. In the 1990s, psychiatrist Thomas Ware conducted an experiment. He placed volunteers in darkness for 14 hours each night, mimicking the natural light conditions of winter. After a few weeks of adjustment, the subjects settled into a pattern of sleeping in 2 distinct blocks, with 1 to 2 hours of quiet wakefulness in between. Their bodies spontaneously return to segmented sleep when freed from artificial lighting and modern schedules. During that middle-of-the-night wakeful period, where subjects reported feeling unusually calm and contemplative. Their brain chemistry showed elevated levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with feelings of peace and satisfaction. Some described it as a meditative state, unlike anything they experienced during daytime waking hours. Think about that for a moment. We've lost an entire state of consciousness that our ancestors experienced every night. A quiet, peaceful period of wakefulness in the darkness, when the mind drifts between sleep and full alertness, when thoughts flow in unusual patterns, when the boundary between dreams and waking thoughts becomes permeable. In a Paleolithic camp, this would have been a time for quiet conversation. Lying in the darkness, warm under hides, you might whisper with your partner about the day to come. Or you might simply lie still, listening to the breathing of your sleeping community. The crackle of the fire, the night sounds of the world beyond your shelter. No pressure to be productive, no guilt about not sleeping, just a peaceful interlude, as natural as breathing. As full dawn approaches, the pace of activity increases slightly, but only slightly. An older woman might begin sorting through gathered plant materials, checking what needs to be processed today. A man might examine his spear, testing the binding that holds the stone point in place. Children who are old enough begin to stir, though the youngest remains sleeping, curled against their mothers. There's grooming. This is important, more important than we might initially think. In many primate species, grooming serves not just hygienic purposes, but social ones. It builds bonds, reduces tension, reinforces relationships. Among early humans, mornings might have included time for picking through each other's hair, checking for parasites, tending to small cuts or abrasions. These aren't chores in our modern sense. They're acts of care, moments of connection, ways of saying, I see you, I tend to you, you matter to me. A young woman braids her sister's hair, fingers moving with practiced ease. Two men sit close, one helping the other work a tangle from his beard. An elder gently examines a child's scraped knee, applying a poultice of crushed leaves. These small acts of mutual care would have been woven throughout the morning, unremarkable yet essential. The fire is fully built now, flames dancing in the growing light. Someone places stones near the heat, warming them for later use in cooking, or perhaps for warmth. Others begin to gather, sitting in loose groups around the fire, talking quietly. The conversation might be about plans for the day, or it might be about nothing in particular. Stories from dreams, observations about the weather, speculation about where the game animals might be moving. There's no agenda. No one is running a meeting. The flow of conversation is organic, people joining and leaving as they feel moved to do so. Some sit in companionable silence, simply being present with others. This is how humans are meant to socialize, how we did socialize for the vast majority of our existence as a species. Compare that to modern mornings. Many of us wake alone, or if we wake with others, we're immediately caught up in the logistics of getting ready, getting out, getting to work. Our morning conversations, if we have them at all, are functional. Did you remember to pay that bill? What time is your meeting? Don't forget to pick up milk. We're coordinating, managing, optimizing. We're not just being together. The Hadza, when studied by anthropologists, show virtually no signs of depression or anxiety disorders. This isn't because their lives are easy. They face real challenges, real dangers, real losses. But the constant baseline of social connection, the absence of isolation, the rhythm of life that aligns with biological needs rather than fighting against them, these factors appear to provide profound psychological protection. And here's what's remarkable. This protection starts from the very beginning of life. Anthropological data consistently shows that in hunter-gatherer societies, infants sleep with their mothers until age 3 or 4, nursing on demand throughout the night. This isn't considered unusual or problematic. It's simply how children are raised. The infant who fussed earlier is now nursing contentedly, the mother's body responding automatically to the child's needs. Her milk lets down without conscious thought, the result of millions of years of evolutionary fine-tuning. She doesn't worry about whether this will make the child too dependent, whether she should be sleep training, whether she's creating bad habits. The very questions that torture modern parents simply don't exist. Other children, now fully awake, begin to play near the fire. A toddler toddles toward the flames, and an older sibling casually redirects them, not with alarm, but with the easy competence of someone who's helped mind younger children since they themselves were barely older than a toddler. Child rearing is communal. Everyone watches everyone's children. Everyone teaches. Everyone corrects. Everyone comforts. By the time the sun has fully risen, the camp is awake and active, but still not in a hurry. The rhythm is unhurried, organic, responsive to the moment, rather than driven by external demands. Some people have drifted away to attend to personal needs. Others remain by the fire, enjoying the warmth, the company, the simple pleasure of being alive on a new day. This is the part that's hardest for us to grasp, perhaps. The absence of productivity pressure. No one is checking a to-do list. No one is feeling guilty about not having accomplished enough yet. No one is anxious about the day ahead because there's nothing to be anxious about. The day will unfold as it unfolds. There will be work to do, food to gather or hunt, but there's no deadline, no quota, no performance review. The evidence from Blombos Cave and other archaeological sites shows sophisticated toolmaking, artistic expression, and complex social organization. These weren't simple people leading simple lives. They were humans as cognitively complex as we are, with the same capacity for abstract thought, creativity, and emotional depth. But they lived in a rhythm that honored their biology rather than fighting against it. Their mornings weren't about gearing up for battle against the day. They were about gently transitioning from sleep to wakefulness, from the private world of dreams to the shared world of the community, from the quiet of night to the activity of day. And they did this without alarm clocks, without coffee, without the artificial stimulation we've come to depend on. Consider this. The cortisol spike we experience from alarm clocks, that jolt of stress hormones that shocks us into wakefulness, that's not how we're meant to wake. It's a violence we do to our bodies every single day. So normalized we don't even recognize it as violence. But it is. It's forcing our biology to conform to schedules that have nothing to do with human needs and everything to do with industrial efficiency. Our ancestors woke with the light, their bodies prepared by gradual hormonal changes, their minds easing into consciousness rather than being dragged there. And they woke surrounded by community, by people who knew them, cared for them, would spend the day with them. They woke to a world where the day's activities would be varied and social, where work and leisure blended together, where there was time for everything that mattered. The sun is higher now, casting long shadows across the camp. The morning has fully arrived. People begin to think about food, about the day's activities, about what needs to be done. But even this thinking is different from ours. There's no desperation, no sense that survival hangs by a thread. Food will be found because food is always found. Not every day brings abundance, but over the course of a week, a month, a season, there's always enough. This is the world we lost. Not a world of brutal survival, but a world of gentle mornings, communal waking, unhurried beginnings to unhurried days. A world where human biology and human society existed in harmony rather than conflict. And the most troubling part? We gave it up voluntarily. We chose alarm clocks and isolation and productivity pressure. We chose to live in ways that make us anxious and depressed and exhausted. We called it progress. But was it? The sun has risen. Bodies have stirred. Minds have eased into wakefulness. And now, inevitably, comes the question that has driven human activity since the beginning. What will we eat today? Picture this. It's mid-morning in the Kalahari Desert, around 30,000 years ago. A group of women, ranging from teenagers to grandmothers, gather near the edge of camp. They carry simple digging sticks, containers woven from plant fibers, perhaps leather pouches. Children tag along, the older ones helping, the younger ones playing nearby. There's conversation, laughter, the casual social exchange that makes any work bearable. They're heading out to gather, and they'll be back by early afternoon with more food than the entire group can eat today. This is the reality of food acquisition for most of human history. Not desperate, not brutal, not even particularly difficult. Just a few hours of work that doubles as social time, that teaches children essential skills, that keeps people connected to the landscape and to each other. But here's where it gets interesting. We've been told for so long that early human life was a constant struggle for survival that we've never stopped to ask the obvious question. If that were true, how did our species survive at all? How did we spread across every continent, thrive in environments from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest, grow our populations, develop art and music, and complex social structures? You can't do any of that if you're spending every waking moment desperately searching for your next meal. The evidence suggests something remarkable. Not only were early humans not constantly struggling to survive, they were actually better fed, worked fewer hours, and had more leisure time than most humans who came after them, right up until the modern era. Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers tell a story that should fundamentally change how we think about human history. In the 1960s, anthropologist Richard Lee conducted detailed time allocation studies among the Kung San people of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa. These studies have become foundational to our understanding of hunter-gatherer work patterns. Lee found that Kung adults spent an average of 12 to 19 hours per week acquiring food. That's less than 3 hours per day. Even when you add in time spent on other activities like tool making, food processing, and camp maintenance, the total work time came to around 40 to 44 hours per week. But here's the crucial detail. This work was spread across 7 days, not compressed into 5 like a modern work week. It meant about 6 hours per day of what we might call productive labor. Compare that to the modern 40-hour work week, which doesn't include commuting time, doesn't include the mental load of work we carry home with us, doesn't include the time spent preparing for work, recovering from work, thinking about work. When you account for all of that, most modern workers dedicate 50 to 60 hours per week to employment. Our ancestors worked half that much, and the pattern repeats across different hunter-gatherer groups. Studies of the Hadza people in Tanzania show that women spend approximately 3 to 4 hours per day gathering plant foods. Men spend 4 to 6 hours hunting, but not every day. Hunting is intermittent, weather-dependent, opportunity-driven. A man might hunt intensively for a few days, then not hunt at all for a week. The average comes out to far less than a modern full-time job. Now, here's what makes this even more fascinating. Not all of that time was actually work in the sense we understand it. Gathering trips were social occasions. Women talked, shared knowledge, kept an eye on children, told stories. Young girls learned which plants were edible, which were medicinal, which were poisonous. They learned where to find water, how to read animal tracks, how to predict seasonal changes. This wasn't separate from gathering. It was part of gathering. The work and the education and the socializing all happened together, seamlessly integrated. Think about what that means. There was no separation between productive time and social time, between work and learning, between economic activity and community building. Everything happened at once, in the same space, with the same people. This is radically different from how we live now, where work happens in one place with one group of people, socializing happens elsewhere with different people, and education is a separate phase of life entirely, cordoned off from everything else. But let's talk about what they were actually eating, because this is where our misconceptions run deepest. We call them hunter-gatherers, and the order of those words matters. It suggests hunting came first, was more important. But the evidence shows the opposite. Gathering provided 60 to 80% of the calories in most hunter-gatherer diets. Plants, not meat, were the foundation of human nutrition for most of our history, and gathering was remarkably efficient. In good environments, gathering could yield 2,000 to 3,000 calories per hour of work. Think about that for a moment. A woman could go out for 3 hours, gather enough calories to feed herself for days, and have surplus to share. The success rate for gathering was near 100%. If you went out to gather, you came back with food. Always. The plants were there, you knew where they were, you knew which ones were edible, you collected them. Done. Hunting was a completely different story. Success rates for hunting averaged around 20 to 25%. That means 3 out of 4 hunting attempts failed. Men would track an animal for hours, only to lose the trail. They'd get close enough for a shot with a spear or arrow, only to miss. They'd wound an animal and then be unable to follow it. Hunting was difficult, uncertain, often frustrating, and yet it remained important, not primarily for calories, but for other nutrients. Meat provided protein, fat, essential vitamins that were harder to get from plant sources. It was nutritionally important even if it wasn't the caloric foundation of the diet. But here's what's really interesting about hunting. It was social, intensely social. Men hunted in groups, sharing knowledge about animal behavior, coordinating strategies, helping each other track and kill large game. And when a hunt succeeded, the meat was shared widely, not just with family, but with the entire band. This wasn't altruism in the modern sense. It was practical insurance. You shared your kill today, because next week someone else would share their kill with you. Over time, everyone benefited. The social bonds created by hunting and meat sharing were crucial to group cohesion. Now let's talk about the knowledge required for all of this, because this is where we really need to adjust our image of early humans as simple or primitive. These were people with encyclopedic knowledge of their environments. Australian Aboriginal groups used over 300 plant species for food and medicine. 300. They knew which parts of each plant were edible and when. They knew how to process toxic plants to make them safe. They knew which plants indicated the presence of water, which ones attracted certain animals, which ones could be used to make tools or containers or medicines. This knowledge was vast, detailed, and accumulated over thousands of years. It was passed down through generations, refined through experience, adapted to local conditions. A skilled gatherer could look at a landscape and see food everywhere, resources invisible to an untrained eye. They could read the seasons and the flowering of particular plants, predict animal movements based on subtle environmental cues, find water in seemingly dry landscapes. The same was true for hunting. Successful hunters needed to understand animal behavior in extraordinary detail. They needed to know how different species reacted to weather changes, what they ate and where they found it, how they moved through the landscape at different times of day and year. They needed to track animals over long distances, interpreting prints and signs that would be meaningless to us. They needed to understand wind patterns, because approaching an animal from upwind meant the animal would smell them and flee. They needed to know the anatomy of different animals, where to strike to kill quickly and humanely. This was sophisticated knowledge, requiring years to master. Young hunters apprenticed with experienced ones, learning through observation and practice. Young gatherers accompanied their mothers and grandmothers, absorbing botanical knowledge through daily exposure. The education was informal but comprehensive, practical but profound. And here's something we often miss. This knowledge wasn't just utilitarian. It was cultural, spiritual, deeply meaningful. Plants and animals weren't just resources. They were part of a living world that humans participated in. Stories explained where different foods came from, why certain plants had particular properties, how humans should relate to the animals they hunted. Gathering and hunting were embedded in a worldview that saw humans as part of nature, not separate from it or dominant over it. Compare this to how most of us relate to our food today. We know almost nothing about where it comes from, how it's grown, what plants it derives from, what animals gave their lives for it. We've outsourced all of that knowledge to industrial systems. We've become disconnected from the most basic aspect of survival, the acquisition of food. And we call this progress. But let's return to that morning gathering trip, because I want you to really picture what it looked like. The women spread out across the landscape, each working at her own pace, but staying within sight and sound of each other. They're talking as they work, sharing news, discussing camp matters, telling stories. The older women point out plants to the younger ones, explaining their uses. A grandmother shows her granddaughter how to dig for tubers, where to find them, how deep they grow. Children play nearby, but they're also learning. They're watching the adults, imitating their actions, gradually absorbing the skills they'll need. A 5-year-old collects easy-to-find berries, proud to contribute. A 10-year-old practices using a digging stick, not as efficiently as the adults yet, but learning. A teenager works alongside her mother, nearly as skilled now, preparing to be a provider herself. This is education, but it doesn't feel like education. It's just life, happening naturally, Skills transmitted through participation rather than formal instruction. There are no tests, no grades, no performance anxiety. You learn by doing, by watching, by gradually taking on more responsibility as you become capable. And you learn in the context of real work that matters, that feeds people, that contributes to the community. By midday, the gathering is done. The women have collected mongongo nuts, which are rich in protein and fat. They've dug up tubers, starchy and filling. They've gathered leafy greens, berries, perhaps some honey if they found a hive. The containers are full, heavy with food. And now they walk back to camp, still talking, still teaching, children running ahead or trailing behind. Back at camp, the food is processed and shared. Nuts are cracked, tubers are cooked in the coals of the fire, greens are prepared. Everyone eats, not just the nuclear family, but the entire band. Food is abundant, and there's no concept of hoarding it. You share what you have, because everyone shares what they have. This is the original social safety net, far more reliable than any government program, based on reciprocity and relationship rather than bureaucracy and rules. And here's what's remarkable. It's early afternoon now. The day's food has been acquired. Bellies are full. And there are still hours of daylight left. Hours with nothing particular that needs to be done. No boss demanding productivity. No schedule to keep. No sense that time is being wasted if it's not being used productively. This is the part that's hardest for us to grasp. The abundance of time, the lack of time pressure, the absence of that constant modern anxiety that we should be doing something, accomplishing something, making progress towards some goal. But let's talk about hunting too, because it deserves its own attention, even if it provided fewer calories. Picture a group of men leaving camp in the early morning, tracking a kudu they spotted yesterday. They move quietly, reading signs on the ground, discussing in low voices what the tracks tell them. The animal passed this way recently, maybe an hour ago. It's moving toward water. They follow. Hours pass. The sun climbs higher. The men spread out, staying in visual contact, moving in a coordinated pattern that will eventually surround the animal or drive it toward one of the hunters. This requires communication, strategy, patience. It requires understanding not just where the animal is, but where it's going, what it's thinking, how it will react to their presence. They get close. One hunter has a shot. He throws his spear. It misses. The animal bolts, crashing through the brush. Gone. The men regroup. There's disappointment, but not despair. This happens all the time. They'll try again tomorrow or the day after. In the meantime, there's plenty of plant food back at camp. No one will go hungry. But sometimes the hunt succeeds. The spear finds its mark, the animal falls, and then there's the work of butchering, of carrying the meat back to camp, of distributing it according to complex social rules about who gets which parts. The successful hunter doesn't keep the best portions for himself. Often he gets less than others. The meat is shared based on need, on relationship, on maintaining social bonds. And when the hunters return with meat, there's celebration. Not wild excitement, but satisfaction, appreciation, the pleasure of abundance. The meat is cooked and eaten, and the eating is social, communal, a time for storytelling and laughter and strengthening the bonds that hold the group together. The evidence from sites like Blombos Cave in South Africa shows that these people were processing ochre for body decoration 100,000 years ago. They were making sophisticated tools, creating art, engaging in symbolic behavior. These weren't simple people leading simple lives. They had the same cognitive capacity we do, the same need for meaning and beauty and social connection. But they met those needs in ways that didn't require constant labor. Here's something that should bother you more than it probably does. We've created a world where most people spend the majority of their waking hours doing work they don't find meaningful. To earn money to buy food they didn't grow, to live in houses they barely have time to enjoy, in communities where they barely know their neighbors. We've traded the 3-hour workday for the 50-hour workweek. We've traded abundant leisure for constant busyness. We've traded community-based food sharing for individual household food insecurity, where some people have too much and others go hungry. And we call this progress. We call this civilization. We look back at our ancestors and pity them for their primitive lives, never stopping to ask whether they might have pitied us for ours. The Kung-san in Lee's studies had a varied diet of over 100 different plant and animal foods. They weren't eating the same thing every day. They had seasonal variation, dietary diversity, nutritional adequacy. They were, by modern standards, well-nourished. Skeletal evidence from prehistoric sites shows that hunter-gatherers were generally taller, healthier, and had better teeth than early agricultural populations. The transition to farming actually made human health worse, not better, at least for the first several thousand years. But here's the deeper question. Why did we give this up? If life was so good, if work was minimal and leisure abundant, if food was plentiful and health was good, why did we ever abandon this way of life for agriculture, which required more work, provided less dietary diversity, and made us more vulnerable to famine and disease? The answer is complicated, and we may never fully understand it. But it wasn't because hunter-gatherer life was brutish and desperate. The evidence doesn't support that narrative at all. It was something else, some combination of population pressure, climate change, cultural evolution, and perhaps simple curiosity about new ways of living. But that's a story for later. For now, I want you to sit with this image. A group of humans, 30,000 years ago, finishing their midday meal. The food was acquired in a few hours of work that doubled as social time and education. Bellies are full. Children are playing. Adults are resting in the shade, talking quietly, perhaps napping. The afternoon stretches ahead, long and unhurried. This was normal. This was life. Not for a privileged few, but for everyone. Not occasionally, but every day. This was the human baseline, the pattern we evolved for, the rhythm that shaped our biology and our psychology for hundreds of thousands of years. And then we changed it. In what amounts to an eye blink in evolutionary time, we restructured human life completely. We created scarcity where there had been abundance. We created time poverty where there had been leisure. We created isolation where there had been community. The question isn't whether early humans could survive. Clearly they could. They thrived. The question is whether we can survive what we've done to ourselves, the world we've created that runs counter to every pattern of human life that came before it. With bellies full and the sun at its peak, we enter the hours that most challenge our assumptions, the long afternoon. Picture this. The sun has reached its apex, blazing down from directly overhead. The temperature in the savannah has climbed into the high 80s, maybe low 90s. The camp, so active just hours ago, has transformed into something resembling a painting of perfect stillness. Most of the group has retreated to the shade of acacia trees, to rock overhangs, to simple shelters made of branches and hides. A woman lies in dappled shadow, her head resting on a leather bundle, eyes closed. Not asleep, not quite, but in that liminal space between waking and dreaming. Two men sit with their backs against a boulder, talking in low voices, their conversation punctuated by long, comfortable silences. Children have abandoned their energetic morning games for quieter play, drawing patterns in the dust with sticks, examining interesting pebbles. An older man is genuinely asleep, snoring softly, his face peaceful. A teenage girl braids her sister's hair with slow, deliberate movements, in no hurry to finish. This is the long afternoon, and it looks to our modern eyes like nothing at all is happening. But here's the thing. Something profound is happening. Or rather, something profound is not happening. No one is anxious about wasting time. No one is checking a mental to-do list, feeling guilty about rest. No one is thinking about productivity, about getting ahead, about falling behind. The concept doesn't exist. There's no behind to fall to. There's no ahead to get to. There's just this moment, this afternoon, this comfortable existence in the present tense. The evidence from time allocation studies of modern hunter-gatherers is startling, especially when you compare it to our own lives. The Kung-san, those same people Richard Lee studied in the Kalahari, don't just work less than we do. They actively leisure more. We're talking about 4 to 6 hours per day spent in what researchers categorize as leisure activities. Not sleep, not food preparation, not tool maintenance. Pure leisure. Visiting with neighbors, playing games, telling stories, lying in the shade, doing absolutely nothing in particular. 4 to 6 hours, every single day. Think about that for a moment. When was the last time you had 4 hours of genuine leisure? Not watching television while scrolling your phone and thinking about work emails. Not relaxing while simultaneously feeling guilty about everything you're not doing, but actual, guilt-free, present moment leisure. For most of us, the answer is never, or so long ago we can't remember. The Piraha people of Brazil, studied extensively by linguist Daniel Everett, take this even further. Everett describes entire afternoons where adults simply lie in hammocks, talking, laughing, occasionally getting up to interact with children or grab some food, then returning to their hammocks. Hours upon hours of what we would call doing nothing. And crucially, no one thinks this is problematic. No one is concerned about it. It's not laziness. It's not avoidance. It's just life. It's how humans spend their time when they're not constrained by artificial schedules and productivity demands. There's something profound here, something that should trouble us more than it probably does. We've constructed a world where rest requires justification, where leisure must be earned, where doing nothing feels like moral failure. But this is a recent invention, this guilt about rest. For the vast majority of human history, rest was simply part of the rhythm of life, as natural and necessary as activity. The siesta, that midday rest period common across Mediterranean, Latin American, and tropical cultures, isn't a quirky cultural tradition. It's a biological imperative that most human societies honored until very recently. Our circadian rhythms include a natural dip in alertness in the early afternoon, roughly 7 to 9 hours after waking. This isn't laziness. It's not a sign of insufficient nighttime sleep. It's how human bodies are designed to function. We're meant to rest in the heat of the day. But modern industrial society, with its 8-hour continuous workday, its fluorescent lighting and climate control, has overridden this pattern. We fight against it with caffeine, with artificial stimulation, with sheer willpower. And we pay the price in stress, in exhaustion, in the epidemic of sleep disorders that plague modern populations. We've declared war on our own biology and then wondered why we feel so terrible. Archaeological evidence suggests that afternoon rest wasn't just accepted, but expected in prehistoric societies. The layout of camps, the positioning of shelters, the design of living spaces all point to people who spent significant portions of their day in and around their home base, not out working. And what were they doing during these hours? The answer is both simple and complex. They were being human. Conversation, it turns out, may be the most important activity of prehistoric life. Not hunting, not gathering, not tool-making, conversation. The endless, meandering, seemingly purposeless talk that fills the hours when humans gather together. British anthropologist Robin Dunbar has spent decades studying human social networks, and his research reveals something fascinating about how we're wired. Dunbar's number, as it's come to be known, is roughly 150. That's the number of stable social relationships the average human can maintain. Not acquaintances, not people you recognize, but people you know well enough to have a relationship with, to understand their place in the social network, to feel comfortable asking for help or offering it. This number appears to be a cognitive limit, related to the size of our neocortex. Primates with larger brains can maintain larger social networks, and humans, with our enormous brains, top out at around 150. But here's what makes this relevant to our afternoon scene. Maintaining 150 relationships requires enormous amounts of social time. Dunbar estimates that humans need to spend roughly 40% of their waking hours in social interaction just to maintain their social networks. 40%. That's not working together. That's actual social grooming. The human equivalent of what other primates do when they sit together picking through each other's fur. For us, that grooming takes the form of conversation. Gossip, specifically. Not gossip in the negative sense, though that's certainly part of it, but gossip in the anthropological sense, the sharing of social information. Who's allied with whom? Who can be trusted? Who's having relationship problems? Who's generous? Who's stingy? Who's skilled at what? This information is the currency of human social life, and acquiring it, processing it, sharing it requires hours upon hours of talk. The long afternoon provided that time. People visiting back and forth between shelters, small groups forming and reforming as individuals moved from one conversation to another, stories being told and retold, refined with each telling, jokes and laughter, arguments and reconciliations. The entire complex web of human social life being woven and maintained through the simple act of talking. Imagine for a moment having enough time for this. Enough time to actually maintain deep relationships with 150 people. Enough time to know everyone in your community intimately, to understand their stories, their struggles, their joys. Enough time to be known by them in return. This wasn't a luxury. This was normal life. This was what humans did with their time. Compare that to our modern existence. Most of us struggle to maintain relationships with even a dozen people. We're friends with hundreds on social media, but truly close to almost no one. We're lonely in crowds, isolated in cities of millions. And we wonder why rates of depression and anxiety keep climbing. We've cut ourselves off from the social richness that defined human life for hundreds of thousands of years, and we're suffering for it. But the afternoon wasn't just about talk, it was also about play. And not just children's play, though that was certainly part of it. Adult play. Games, competition, physical activity for the sheer joy of it. Archaeological evidence of gaming pieces dates back at least 40,000 years. Carved bone dice, game boards etched into stone, pieces that clearly served no practical purpose, but were crafted with care and used extensively. These weren't rare luxury items. They're found at sites across the world, suggesting that games were a universal human activity. Ethnographic accounts of modern hunter-gatherers describe adults playing games for hours. Wrestling matches that are half competition, half performance. Throwing contests, races. Elaborate games with complex rules passed down through generations. And dancing, always dancing. Not formal, choreographed performance, but spontaneous movement, people responding to rhythm, to music, to each other, for the sheer physical pleasure of it. This is what leisure looked like before we invented the concept of entertainment as a commodity. People made their own fun. They didn't consume entertainment created by professionals. They participated in it, created it, lived it. Everyone was a player, a dancer, a storyteller, a musician. There was no audience, no separation between performer and spectator. You didn't watch life happen. You were in it. The absence of productivity pressure is perhaps the hardest thing for us to grasp. We live in a world where time is money, where efficiency is virtue, where doing nothing is waste. These equations feel natural to us, obvious, like laws of nature. But they're not. They're recent inventions, products of industrial capitalism, and they would have been completely incomprehensible to our ancestors. In a hunter-gatherer society, there's no concept of wasting time because there's no scarcity of time. You can't save time for later. You can't invest time to get more time. Time just is. It passes whether you're working or resting, whether you're active or idle. And since the work that needs to be done is relatively minimal and can be accomplished in a few hours, there's no pressure to fill every moment with productive activity. This creates a completely different relationship with rest. Rest isn't something you earn through work. It's not a reward for productivity. It's not even really separate from work. It's just part of life, woven throughout the day, as natural as breathing. You work when work needs doing. You rest when you feel like resting. You play when the mood strikes. You talk because humans are social animals who need connection. The Kung San, in those same time allocation studies, spend more hours per day in visiting and entertaining than they do in food acquisition and preparation combined. Let that sink in. More time socializing than working. And this isn't unusual. This isn't a particularly leisured society. This is typical of hunter-gatherers across diverse environments and cultures. Humans, when not constrained by artificial systems, naturally spend most of their time in social leisure. But here's what's really fascinating. This leisure wasn't empty. It wasn't the kind of numbed-out, exhausted collapse that passes for relaxation in modern life. It was active, engaged, creative leisure. People were making things not because they had to, not for economic gain, but because making things is satisfying. Carving bone, crafting beads, experimenting with pigments. Creating art not as a separate category of activity but as something woven into daily life. Children, during these long afternoons, were learning through play. Not formal education, not lessons, but observation and imitation and experimentation. They watched adults make tools and tried making their own. They listened to stories and absorbed the knowledge embedded in them. They played hunting games that taught them tracking and strategy. They climbed trees and threw stones and tested their bodies, developing the physical skills they'd need as adults. And crucially, they did this in mixed age groups. Toddlers playing alongside teenagers, playing alongside adults. Everyone learning from everyone else. Knowledge flowing naturally through the community without formal instruction. The 3-year-old watching the 7-year-old, watching the 15-year-old, watching the adult. Skills and knowledge transmitted not through teaching, but through living together. This kind of learning requires time. It requires the long, unstructured hours we've eliminated from modern childhood. We've replaced free play with scheduled activities, replaced mixed age groups with age-segregated classrooms, replaced learning through living with formal instruction. And then we wonder why children seem less capable, less resilient, less creative than previous generations. The afternoon would eventually give way to more focused activity. Tools that needed making, hides that needed processing, baskets that needed weaving. But even this work was social, done in groups, accompanied by conversation and laughter. The line between work and leisure was blurry, permeable. You might be scraping a hide while gossiping with friends, making a basket while supervising children, napping a stone tool while telling a story. This integration of work and social life is something we've lost almost completely. We work in isolation or in the artificial sociality of workplace relationships. We come home exhausted and collapse in front of screens. We've separated work from life so completely that we need the concept of work-life balance to describe what should be a natural integration. There's a melancholy in contemplating this lost world, not because we can return to it, we can't, but because it reveals how far we've drifted from patterns that sustained human well-being for hundreds of thousands of years. We've created material abundance beyond anything our ancestors could have imagined. We have technology, medicine, knowledge, comfort, but we've also created time poverty, social isolation, chronic stress, and a pervasive sense that we're not living the way we're meant to live. The Kung San elder, interviewed by Richard Lee, when asked what he thought about the modern world, said something that should haunt us. He said that modern people seemed very busy and very unhappy, always rushing, always worried, never satisfied. He couldn't understand why anyone would choose to live that way. He felt sorry for us. Think about what that means. A man living in one of the harshest environments on Earth, with none of our technology or material wealth, felt sorry for us, not envious. Sorry, because he had something we don't have. Time, community, a life where work and rest and play and social connection all flowed together naturally, where there was enough of everything that mattered, where the pace of life matched the pace of human biology. The long afternoon in prehistoric camps across the world was a time of profound human richness. Not richness in possessions, but richness in time, in relationships, in the simple pleasure of being alive and human and together. It was a time when conversation was the primary activity, when play wasn't just for children, when rest required no justification, when doing nothing was a perfectly legitimate way to spend several hours. We look back at this and call it primitive. We imagine our ancestors were desperate to escape this life, to develop agriculture and civilization and all the complexity that followed. But the evidence suggests otherwise. The transition to agriculture wasn't a triumph of progress over misery. It was a slow, reluctant shift driven by population pressure and climate change, a shift that made life harder, not easier, for thousands of years. Our ancestors weren't waiting to be rescued from their terrible lives. They were living well, by most meaningful measures better than we live now. They had time, they had community, they had health, they had purpose, they had joy. What they didn't have was material accumulation, technological complexity, or the ability to support large, dense populations. Whether that trade-off was worth it is a question we still haven't answered. As the afternoon stretches on, as shadows begin to lengthen and the heat slowly releases its grip on the day, people begin to stir from their rest. Not all at once, not on any schedule, but gradually, naturally. Someone gets up to check on a child. Someone else decides to work on that basket they started yesterday. A group of teenagers wanders off to swim in a nearby stream. The rhythm of the day shifts, almost imperceptibly, from the deep rest of midday toward the more active hours of late afternoon and evening. But even this transition is unhurried. There's no alarm marking the end of rest period, no supervisor calling everyone back to work. People move according to their own internal rhythms, responding to their own needs and desires. Some will continue resting for hours yet. Others are ready for activity. Both are fine, both are normal, both are human. This flexibility, this responsiveness to individual variation is another thing we've lost. We've standardized human life, forced everyone into the same schedule, regardless of their natural rhythms. Early birds and night owls alike must conform to the 9 to 5. Children who need more sleep and children who need less must wake at the same time, attend school on the same schedule. We've eliminated flexibility in the name of efficiency, and we're paying the price in exhaustion and dysfunction. But in that prehistoric camp, as the afternoon slowly transforms into evening, people are simply being human, resting when they need rest, active when they feel energetic, social when they crave connection, solitary when they need space, living in harmony with their own biology rather than in constant battle against it. There's something profound here, something we need to sit with. The long afternoon, that stretch of hours that seems like nothing when viewed through our productivity-obsessed lens, was actually everything. It was when human social bonds were maintained and strengthened, when children learned through play and observation, when adults rested their bodies and minds, when creativity flourished, not as a separate category, but as something woven into daily life, when people simply existed together, unhurried, unworried, fully present. We gave this up. We traded it for material abundance, for technological progress, for civilization and all its discontents. Whether that was a good trade is something each of us must decide for ourselves. But we should at least be honest about what we lost. We lost time. We lost ease. We lost the deep security of living in stable communities where everyone knew everyone and no one was alone. We lost the rhythm of life that matched our biology. We lost the long afternoon. And having lost it, we've forgotten it ever existed. We look back and see only misery and struggle, projecting our own anxiety onto people who likely felt none. We assume they must have wanted what we have, must have been striving toward our kind of life. But maybe they weren't. Maybe they had something better, at least in some ways that matter. Maybe the long afternoon, with its rest and play and conversation and unhurried ease, was a kind of wealth we can barely imagine. Picture this. You are sitting cross-legged on the packed earth, the afternoon sunlight filtering through the branches, gold and dappled on your skin. In your palm rests a bead, smooth, cool, impossibly old. It is a Nassarius shell bead, small enough to roll between your fingertips. The hole bored through its spiral is perfect. Not a crack or jagged edge, but the result of patient, practiced work. This bead was made around 75,000 years ago, in a cave on the southern tip of Africa. Blombos Cave, they call it now. But to the people who made this bead, it was home. Consider the hands that made this. What was the world like in that distant time? The climate was harsher, sometimes colder, sometimes dry. The great animals of the Ice Age still roamed. But here, in the shelter of the cave, a small group of humans sat together. Not just surviving, but making things. Together they gathered shells from the shore, selected just the right ones, drilled the holes using stone tools and sand, threaded them onto strips of animal sinew. They talked as they worked, laughed, perhaps told stories, or sang softly to themselves. Some were teaching, some learning. The work was social, rhythmic, almost meditative. And here's what's remarkable. These beads were not made for eating, hunting, or shelter. They served no practical function in the sense we usually mean. They were used for adornment, worn on the body, sewn onto clothing, or perhaps exchanged as gifts. They were beautiful for beauty's sake. The people of Blombos Cave made over 40 of these beads, and archaeologists have found more than 8,000 pieces of ochre at the site. Ochre is a soft, iron-rich mineral, red or yellow. The people ground it down, mixed it with fat or water, used it to decorate their skin, their tools, their surroundings. This was not a fleeting moment of creativity. It was a tradition, passed from hand to hand, year after year, generation after generation. Think about what that means. We are taught to see early humans as creatures of necessity, scraping by, every action dictated by the struggle to survive. But the evidence tells a different story. When you hold that bead, or imagine the swirl of ochre on ancient skin, you are witnessing a mind that cared about meaning, about beauty, about self-expression. Our ancestors were not just tool makers, they were artists. The rhythm of creation filled the long afternoons. Tool-making was not solitary drudgery, but a social act. One person knapped a flake from a core, another watched, mimicking the movement, learning through imitation and quiet instruction. The sound of stone on stone echoed through the camp. Sometimes the group gathered around an elder, whose hands moved with practiced ease, transforming rough stone into a hand axe or a scraper. Children played nearby, watching, absorbing the secrets, waiting for their turn. Conversation flowed. Mistakes were laughed at, successes admired. Each tool bore the signature of its maker, a curve here, a notch there, a subtle preference for one way of gripping over another. Experimental archaeologists today have tried to recreate these ancient tools. An Acheulean hand axe, a tool with a symmetrical, teardrop shape and sharp edges, can be made in about 20 to 30 minutes by someone who knows what they're doing. But here's the strange thing. Many of the hand axes we find, especially in sites over 300,000 years old, show an investment of time and precision far beyond what was strictly necessary. Some took hours, even days, to perfect. Edges are smoothed, points refined, the symmetry nearly flawless. Not because a rougher tool wouldn't work, but because the maker wanted something more. Why? Some researchers think these were teaching tools, or objects of pride, demonstrations of skill to others in the group. Others suggest they played a role in courtship, or in signaling status, or simply in the joy of mastering a difficult craft. The answer is complicated. We may never know for certain, but the pattern is unmistakable. Our ancestors valued not just utility, but excellence, and perhaps even beauty, in the things they made. And this is where it gets really interesting. The blurred line between function and art is everywhere in the archaeological record. The earliest evidence of painting dates back at least 100,000 years, red ochre streaks on rock, deliberate, placed with care. But it is in the caves of Europe, tens of thousands of years later, that this impulse explodes into something hauntingly familiar. Picture Chauvet Cave in southern France. The year is around 36,000 years ago. Deep inside the earth, beyond the reach of sunlight, a group of people enters by torchlight. The air is cool still, the darkness absolute. They bring with them charcoal, ochre, and a vision. On the curved limestone walls, they draw horses, lions, rhinoceroses, mammoths. The animals are not just outlines, but alive with movement, shading, perspective, the suggestion of muscle and breath and speed. Some images are layered, as if capturing a herd in motion or a story unfolding. In all, there are over 400 animals depicted in Chauvet, rendered with skill that would not look out of place in a modern art gallery. And here's what's remarkable. Many of these paintings are placed in locations that are difficult to reach. Some are high above the floor, accessible only by climbing. Others are hidden in narrow passages. The artists worked by flickering torchlight, sometimes lying on their backs, sometimes standing on makeshift scaffolding. They used brushes, fingers, even stencils made from their own hands. They mixed pigments, experimented with textures. In some places, they scraped the cave wall to create a white background before painting. This was not casual doodling. It was planned, deliberate, a communal project. What drove them? Some say these were ritual spaces, places where people sought to connect with the spirits of the animals they hunted and revered. Others argue for storytelling, or the marking of territory, or the teaching of knowledge to the young. The honest answer is that we don't know. But the sophistication of the art, its realism, its dynamism, its sheer scale, forces us to rethink our assumptions. These were not primitive minds. They were minds like ours, driven by curiosity, imagination, and the desire to leave a mark. Consider the hands that made this. The hands that ground ochre, that carved lines into rock, that traced the outline of a bison or a bear. What were they thinking in that moment? Were they lost in concentration, or humming a tune? Did they work in silence, or surrounded by the murmurs and laughter of others? We can only guess, but the evidence is unambiguous. They cared deeply about what they were doing. This passion for creation was not limited to painting. Across Europe, from France to Siberia, archaeologists have unearthed small figurines, carved from ivory, bone, or stone. The most famous are the so-called Venus figurines, exaggerated female forms with swelling hips, full breasts, rounded bellies. The oldest, the Venus of Hohlfels from Germany, is at least 40,000 years old. Others, like the Venus of Willendorf in Austria, date from around 27,000 to 20,000 years ago. They fit snugly in the palm of a hand. What were these figurines for? Some scholars see them as fertility symbols, representations of motherhood and abundance. Others see them as self-portraits, or as ritual objects, or as teaching tools for midwives. The debate continues because the evidence is ambiguous. Some figurines show traces of red ochre, suggesting they were painted or used in ceremonies. Others have wear marks that hint at being carried or handled often. One thing is certain: a staggering investment of time and care went into making them. The delicate incisions, the careful polishing, the balancing of form and weight. These were not objects made in haste. They were labors of love. This brings us to something even more fascinating. Personal adornment. Beads, pendants, feathers, ochre appears almost everywhere humans are found. It is as if the urge to decorate ourselves is as old as our species. In Blombos Cave, as we've seen, over 8,000 pieces of ochre were uncovered, some with deliberate incisions, others ground into powder. In the caves of Israel, similar beads and pendants have been found, dating back over 100,000 years. In Dolní Věstonice, in what is now the Czech Republic, people 29,000 years ago made thousands of clay figurines and animal carvings. Some small enough to be worn, others large enough to sit in the center of a shelter. The time investment is staggering. Making a single bead might take hours, first collecting the raw material, then shaping, drilling, polishing, threading. Making enough for a necklace or a belt could require days of labor. And yet, people did it willingly, again and again, over millennia. Why invest so much in something that cannot be eaten, cannot hunt, cannot keep you warm? The answer must be found in the mind, in the drive for meaning, in the desire to express identity, to belong, to signal beauty or status, or simply to play. Think about that for a moment. We live in a world saturated with art and adornment, jewelry, tattoos, clothing, music, dance. It is easy to forget that this is not a recent development. It is one of the oldest, most universal features of our species. The impulse to create beauty, to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, is as deep as our bones. But the story doesn't end with the objects themselves. It is just as much about the process of making as about the thing made. Craft is, in many ways, a form of meditation. The repeated movement of hand and tool, the rhythm of grinding ochre, the careful threading of shell onto sinew. The mind enters a different state. Time slows, worries fade, the senses sharpen. This is not work in the modern sense, but something closer to flow, a merging of action and awareness, a quiet satisfaction in the act of creation. Some researchers believe that these craft activities played a vital role in mental health. The regularity of the actions, the sense of accomplishment, the opportunity for social interaction, all of these things would have soothed and strengthened the mind. Compare that to our own world, where anxiety and distraction often rule the day. The rhythm of ancient craft was a balm, and it was not just adults who participated. Children learned by watching, by helping, by being gently corrected and praised. The skills were passed down without written instruction, embodied in gesture and repetition. The group as a whole benefited. Knowledge was not hoarded but shared. The best toolmakers taught others. The most creative artists inspired imitation. This is what makes early human communities so fascinating. The way skill and knowledge circulated, binding people together across generations. Now, let's return for a moment to the Acheulean hand axes. Some of these tools, as we've said, could be made quickly, in under half an hour. But the masterpieces, the symmetrical, carefully finished examples, required so much more. Archaeologists have found hand axes that seem never to have been used, their edges unworn, their surfaces polished. Some are found in deposits with dozens, even hundreds of similar objects, almost as if they were offerings or displays. The evidence suggests that sometimes the making was the point, not the using. Here's the thing. In a world without museums or galleries, These objects were the art. They were carried, admired, perhaps given as gifts or displayed with pride. The act of making was a kind of performance, a demonstration of mastery and patience. The line between tool and artwork was thin, sometimes invisible. But that was just the beginning. The urge to decorate, to beautify, to create meaning from matter extended to every aspect of life. Clothing was often made from animal skins, but rarely left plain. Edges were fringed, decorated with shells or bone beads. Some groups used plant fibers to weave baskets or mats, their surfaces adorned with geometric patterns. Even tools, scrapers, spear points, atlatls were occasionally incised with lines, dots, or animal forms. These marks had no practical function. They were messages, perhaps, or signatures, or simply the joy of making something more than it needed to be. In some cases, the investment went even further. The caves of Altamira in Spain, Lascaux in France, and Pechmerel, each a cathedral of Paleolithic art, required not only artistic skill, but logistical planning. Torches had to be made, pigments gathered and prepared, scaffolds built. Some paintings are high on the ceilings, others deep in winding corridors. The people who made them worked in teams, coordinating their efforts, sharing ideas and techniques. It was a collective act of creation, a celebration of shared meaning. But why do it? Why spend so much time and effort on something that would only be seen by a few in the flickering torchlight deep underground? Some researchers think these were ritual spaces, places of initiation or ceremony. Others argue for storytelling, or the transmission of knowledge, maps of the animal world, guides for the hunt. Still others see them as acts of play, or as the joyful assertion of presence. The answer is probably all of these and more. The mystery remains unsolved. What we do know is that the art survives. The beads, the figurines, the painted caves, they are messages in a bottle sent across tens of thousands of years. When we find them, we are not just looking at objects. We are touching the minds that made them. We are hearing the echo of laughter, the murmur of conversation, the quiet concentration of hands at work. Consider the hands that made this. The hands belong to people like us. People who loved, who grieved, who told stories, who dreamed. People who found beauty in the world and wanted to add to it. People who sat in the shade on a long afternoon, surrounded by friends and family, and made something new. Think about what that means. It means that creativity is not an add-on, not a luxury, but a defining feature of what it means to be human. It means that art and craft are not separate from life, but woven into its very fabric. The beads of Blombos, the ochre of ancient Africa, the hand axes of the Acheulean, the paintings of Chauvet and Lascaux, the Venus figurines, all are witnesses to a mind that reached beyond necessity. And here's what's remarkable. This impulse has never vanished. It is found in every culture, in every time, in every place where humans have lived. The urge to create, to decorate, to make meaning from matter is as old as our species. But there's also something haunting here. So much has been lost. For every bead or painting that survives, thousands have vanished, scattered by time, destroyed by water or fire or the simple passage of years. The stories they told, the hands that made them, are mostly gone. The conversations, the laughter, the songs sung as ochre was ground or beads were strung, silent now. The knowledge of how to shape a hand axe with perfect symmetry, how to mix pigments for the deepest red or richest black, how to carve a figurine that fits perfectly in the palm, much of this is lost forever. And yet, in the objects that remain we catch glimpses. We see the patience, the skill, the quiet pride. We see the persistence of beauty, even in the harshest times. We see ourselves. What does this mean for us now? It means that when we make things, when we paint or knit or shape clay or decorate our bodies, we are doing something profoundly ancient. We are reaching back, across the millennia, to join hands with our ancestors. The rhythm of craft, the joy of creation, the pleasure and beauty for its own sake, these are gifts that have been passed down, unbroken, from that first shell bead to the present day. It also means that the long afternoon, that stretch of time we have forgotten how to value, was once the cradle of creativity. It was not wasted time, not idleness, but the fertile ground from which art and meaning grew. The evidence is written in stone and shell, in ochre and bone, in the fingerprints left on cave walls. Compare that to our own world. How often do we have time to make something with our hands, for no reason but the joy of doing it? How often do we sit with others, sharing stories as we work, passing knowledge from one to another? The modern world prizes speed, efficiency, output. But our ancestors prized patience, skill, the slow unfolding of mastery. And that changed everything. It changed the way knowledge was transmitted. It changed the way communities bonded. It changed the way individuals found meaning in their lives. The act of making was not a solitary pursuit, but a social one. Every bead, every painting, every polished hand axe was a thread in the fabric of community. We may never know what each object meant to the people who made it. We can guess, we can theorize, but the full richness of meaning is lost to us. And yet, the feeling is not. The wonder, the pride, the meditative calm of creation, these are universal. The mystery remains unsolved, but the evidence is clear. Consider the hands that made this. A final thought before we leave this long, golden afternoon. Individual creation was only part of the story. As the sun began to dip and the shadows grew long, something else happened. People set aside their tools, brushed the ochre from their hands, put away beads and carvings. The marks they left on stone and bone were only the beginning. Now the group would come together. The rhythm of making would give way to the rhythm of music, of dance, of voices raised in ritual and song. But that, too, has its mysteries. And that is where we turn next. Picture this. The last gold of sunset is fading beyond the trees, and the world is shifting from the long afternoon into something softer, deeper, more mysterious. The air cools, shadows lengthen and merge. Someone in the gathering bends to coax a spark from dry tinder. The first curl of smoke becomes a thread of flame, and soon there's a fire, a living, flickering heart at the center of the human world. People drift toward it, drawn by both need and instinct. In the hush of the coming night, the fire is both warmth and beacon. It is safety, community, shared memory. Look closely and you'll see faces, some young, some old, some shining with the energy of youth, others marked by years and stories. The firelight paints them all with the same living gold, erasing harsh distinctions, drawing them together into a single breathing organism. Maybe it's a tiny group, a family of 6. Maybe it's 20 people, or 30 multiple families, old friends, newcomers. The circle is always just a little imperfect, always open at the edges. The fire is never quite in the center, but still it holds everything together. Here's the thing, this is not just a scene from a distant past. This is a pattern older than almost anything else we do. Archaeological evidence from Kesem Cave in what is now Israel tells us that humans were making fire, tending it, gathering around it, as far back as 400,000 years ago. 400 millennia. Think about that for a moment. Controlled fire was not a recent invention, not a luxury of modernity, but a foundation of what it means to be human. It lengthened the day. It made the darkness less frightening. It let people cook and stay warm and share food. But more than any of these, it created a space, a kind of social stage, where something remarkable could unfold. The fire is a technology, yes, but it is also a kind of magic. It changes not just what people do, but how they are together. There's something almost sacred here, in the way firelight draws people in, slows their movements, softens their voices. The world beyond the ring of light becomes invisible, unthreatening. Inside the circle, time seems to dilate. People lean in, they listen, and perhaps, just perhaps, this is where culture was truly born. Why do I say that? Because when you look at what happens in these firelit hours, you see something that is both universal and astonishingly sophisticated. Here's where stories are told, not just for entertainment, but as a way of transmitting knowledge, values, warnings, dreams. Here's where music is made, where rhythm and melody join voices and hands and feet in shared creation. Here's where ritual emerges, marking the cycles of season and life, binding individuals into a single, breathing community. Here's where elders, living libraries of memory, pass down all that matters to the next generation. Polly Wiesner, an anthropologist who spent years with the Juhuansi or Kungsan people of the Kalahari, noticed something extraordinary about firelight. During the day, conversation is practical, focused on work, who hunted what, where to find water, how to fix a tool. But at night, around the fire, everything changes. Wiesner recorded thousands of hours of talk and found that 81% of firelit conversations were stories, tales of the past, myths, social dramas, whereas only 34% of daytime talk was narrative. That's a staggering difference. The fire does not just extend the day, it transforms it. It makes time for memory, for imagination, for the weaving of identity itself. Think about what that means. In the day, we are animals, busy, hungry, efficient, concerned with survival. At night, we become something else. We become creators of meaning. The fire is more than warmth. It is a crucible in which humanity is remade every night. This is what makes the fire so haunting, so essential. It is not just chemical energy. It is a social technology, a stage for the oldest drama of all, the telling of who we are, who we were, and who we hope to become. Listen closely, and you might hear the first story begin. Maybe it's the oldest woman in the group, her voice low and rhythmic, the words falling into the hush like beads onto a string. Maybe it's a child, eager to share a tale they half remember, half invent. The others lean in. The story may be about a hunt, or a trickster animal, or an ancestor who lived in a world not quite like this one. There are lessons here, but they are hidden, gentle, woven into the fabric of delight. Storytelling is education, yes, but it is also something more. It is entertainment, a way to pass the hours, to make the darkness friendly. It is social glue, binding people together in laughter, in suspense, in the shared ritual of listening. And it is, always, a way of remembering. Every story told is a thread running backward in time, connecting tonight's listeners to generations gone. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Stories are not just about the past. They shape the future. They teach children how to behave, what to fear, whom to trust. They encode information about the world, where the water holes are, which plants are safe, how to survive a drought. And because they are told at night, in the absence of distraction, they sink deep. Memory is stronger in the hush of firelight. Compare that to modern life. How often do we sit in a circle, with nothing but each other and the flicker of flame, and listen without distraction? How many of our stories are told face to face, passed from one living voice to another, rather than filtered through screens? The answer is sobering. But that was just the beginning. Story was only one thread in the tapestry of firelit culture. There was also music, and not just humming or whistling, but real, structured sound. The oldest known musical instrument is a bone flute found in the Hohlefels cave in Germany, dated to about 40,000 years ago. That's before the last ice age reached its peak, before the domestication of the dog, before the invention of pottery or the bow and arrow. Someone, somewhere, carved holes in a vulture bone, learned to shape breath into melody. And someone else listened and remembered and perhaps answered with their own song. Think about that for a moment. Music is not a recent invention. It is not an afterthought. It is as old as art, as old as story, as old as the fire itself. There's evidence of ancient drums, rattles, and even stringed instruments scattered across the prehistoric record. Fragile things, mostly vanished, but their echoes remain in the rhythms of every human culture. Here's the thing. Rhythm is universal. Every culture ever studied, from the Arctic to the Amazon, has some form of music and dance. Babies move to music before they can walk. The heartbeat, the drum, the clapping of hands, these are patterns that speak to something deep in the nervous system. Around the fire, people sang. They drummed on logs or stones. They clapped, stamped, swayed. The music was not performance, not something separate from life, but a way of being together, of syncing bodies and minds in a single, pulsing rhythm. Why did this matter so much? Some researchers think music was a kind of emotional technology, a way of calming anxiety, forging bonds, synchronizing moods. Others argue that it was a training ground for bigger brains, a place to practice imitation, turn-taking, social prediction. The answer is probably both. What is clear is that music and dance, like story, were not luxuries. They were necessities, woven into the fabric of every evening. And then, as the music faded, something even stranger might happen. Ritual. A word that sounds heavy, almost intimidating, but in the firelight it is often gentle, even playful. Ritual is how a group marks time, how it says goodbye to the old and welcomes the new. Maybe it's a coming-of-age dance, a marking of the full moon, a farewell for a hunter lost, a blessing for new life. Ritual is story made flesh, repeated, remembered, binding the group to the cycles of the earth and the sky. Consider Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, a place that should not exist, at least according to our old assumptions. 11,600 years ago, long before the first known cities, before agriculture had fully taken hold, people gathered here to carve vast stone pillars, each weighing up to 20 tons, arrange them in circles, and decorate them with images of animals and mysterious symbols. There are no signs of permanent settlement, no evidence of ordinary daily life. It is a place of gathering, of ceremony, of ritual. A place where hundreds, perhaps thousands, came together for reasons we can only guess at. The honest answer is that we don't know exactly what happened at Göbekli Tepe. Some say it was a temple, a place for the dead, a calendar in stone. Others see it as a theater, a place for storytelling and performance, or a site for forging alliances between distant groups. What is clear is that the urge to gather, to mark time, to create meaning together, is older than farming, older than writing, older than anything we call civilization. Picture the firelight at Göbekli Tepe, flickering on those carved animal shapes as people sang, danced, or told stories. The same pattern, magnified, a circle, a gathering, a passage from ordinary time into something heightened, almost sacred. And this brings us to something even more fascinating, the transmission of knowledge. In the fire-lit hours, when the pace of life slows, the elders become living libraries. They hold the stories, the songs, the rituals, the knowledge of plants and animals, the memory of good years and bad. The young listen, not because they are forced, but because the stories are alive, urgent, necessary. Knowledge is not written down, not locked in books, but embodied, enacted, sung, danced, told and retold until it is woven into the bones. This is what makes oral tradition so remarkable. It is not fragile, not easily lost, because it is constantly renewed. Every night, in every telling, it is reborn. But it is also vulnerable. If the chain of transmission is broken, all that knowledge can vanish in a single generation. But in some places, the chain has held for astonishing spans of time. Consider the Australian Aboriginal songlines, networks of story and song that serve as oral maps, stretching for thousands of kilometers across the continent. These songlines encode information about landmarks, water sources, routes, and sacred sites. They are navigational tools, but also spiritual paths, linking people to ancestors and to the land itself. Some songlines have been transmitted for over 10,000 years. 10 millennia of unbroken memory, sung from parent to child, group to group, night after night, in the firelight. Think about what that means. Before maps, before writing, before even the idea of a history, people were keeping track of place, of time, of belonging, through song and story. The living world became a text, and every singer was both reader and author. There's something almost sacred here, in the persistence of memory, the endurance of meaning across the chasm of time. And yet, it is easy to forget how fragile this system was and is. A single lost generation, a period of disruption or dispersal, and the whole web of knowledge could dissolve. The Aboriginal songlines survived colonization and devastation only by the thinnest of margins. In other places, the chain was broken, the stories lost, the meanings forgotten. This is the paradox of firelight culture. It is both strong and delicate, robust and ephemeral. It can endure for 10,000 years or vanish overnight. But let's return to our circle, to the warmth of the fire and the hush of listening faces. There are children here, drowsing against their mothers, eyes wide with wonder. There are teenagers, restless, half listening, half dreaming their own dreams. There are adults, faces lined with care or laughter, each carrying their own burdens. There are elders, the last link to another world, their voices soft but steady. The fire burns low, and the stories change. They become more personal, tales of love, of jealousy, of mistakes made and lessons learned. They become more philosophical, questions about why the world is as it is, what happens after death, where the ancestors went. Sometimes there is silence, not awkward, but companionable. The fire crackles, the night deepens, stars wheel overhead. This is what makes these hours so profound. They are outside ordinary time. They are the birthplace of meaning, the crucible of culture. In the flickering light, people become more than themselves. They become participants in a drama that stretches backward, unbroken, for hundreds of thousands of years. And perhaps, just perhaps, this is the true legacy of the fire. Not the warmth, not the safety, not even the cooked food, but the space it made for us to come together, to listen, to remember, to dream. Let's linger a little longer with the evidence, because it matters. At Kesem Cave, archaeologists have found thick layers of ash, burned bones, and hundreds of flint tools clustered around what was clearly a hearth, a carefully maintained fire pit. The layers of ash are up to 50 centimeters deep, built up over thousands of years. People kept the fire burning, night after night, generation after generation, in the same spot. The hearth became the anchor of the home, the center of gravity for all other activity. And at Hohlefels, that bone flute, delicate hollowed from a griffon vulture's wing, was found with other artifacts of daily life: beads, carvings, tools. The flute has 5 finger holes, spaced to produce a scale similar to modern pentatonic tuning. Someone, 40,000 years ago, was not just making noise, but music, composed, intentional, beautiful. At Göbekli Tepe, the massive stone circles are surrounded by benches carved into the bedrock, places to sit, to watch, to listen. The carvings are enigmatic: foxes, vultures, snakes, headless humans. The site was purposely buried after about 1,500 years of use, for reasons we may never know. The debate continues because the evidence is ambiguous. Was it a center for shamanic ritual, a meeting place for scattered groups, a calendar, a temple, a stage? The answer is complicated. We may never know for certain, but the pattern, the gathering, the sharing, the marking of time is unmistakable. And with the Australian songlines, the numbers are staggering. Some routes stretch for over 3,000 kilometers, crossing multiple language groups, ecological zones, and sacred territories. Each step on the journey is marked by a verse, a melody, a gesture. The song is both map and prayer, both instruction and invocation. In some regions, elders can recite, in song, the location of every waterhole, every hill, every dangerous crossing, for hundreds of miles in every direction. This is literacy without writing, memory without books. What was lost when these systems faded or were disrupted by colonization, violence, or simply the passage of time? The honest answer is, a world. Not just a set of facts, but a way of being, a way of knowing, of belonging, of making sense of life and death and everything in between. Compare that to the modern world, where information is everywhere, but wisdom is often hard to find. We can Google anything, but we rarely listen with the attention of someone whose life depends on remembering. We have libraries, but we lack living libraries, elders who carry memory in their bodies, who can answer not just what, but why. There's something haunting about that loss. But there is also comfort, a kind of solace, in knowing that the firelight hours are not entirely gone. They persist, in fragments, in family dinners, in campfire songs, in the stories we tell our children as they fall asleep. The pattern is still there, waiting. Now, let's look at the competing theories about why firelight became the birthplace of culture. Some anthropologists argue that the extended hours of wakefulness made possible by fire gave humans more time to think, to plan, to imagine alternatives. Others suggest that the darkness outside the fire forced people to turn inward, to focus on each other, to bond in new ways. Still others point to the safety provided by fire, its power to keep predators at bay, making it possible for larger groups to gather without fear. There are even theories that the flicker of firelight itself, with its rhythmic movement and warm spectrum, triggers particular brain states, states conducive to relaxation, openness, creativity. Experiments with modern subjects have shown that sitting by a fire lowers blood pressure, reduces anxiety, increases feelings of social connection. The fire is both cause and symbol of togetherness. And then there's the evidence from living hunter-gatherers, like the Kung San. Polly Wiesner's work is crucial here. She found that in 174 nights of observation, the Jiu Huanzi told stories about 81% of the time after dark, compared to just 34% during the day. The stories ranged from myths and legends to gossip, jokes, and moral tales. The effect was not just entertainment, but community maintenance, resolving conflicts, reinforcing norms, transmitting values. Some researchers think this is the key to human success. The ability to maintain large, stable groups through shared story, song, and ritual. Others argue that it is simply a byproduct, a happy accident of firelight and leisure. The answer is, as always, complicated, but the result is clear. In the firelit hours, something uniquely human happens. What happens when this is lost? When the fire goes out? When the stories are no longer told? When the music fades? The loss is not just of warmth or light, but of meaning, of continuity, of the sense that we belong to a chain stretching backward and forward in time. And yet, the pattern remains, if we choose to remember. Let's pause for a moment and imagine what it would feel like to be there. To be one of those children, half asleep, listening to the cadence of an elder's voice. To be a teenager, learning the first steps of a dance that has been performed every year for as long as anyone can remember. To be an adult, sharing worries and hopes beneath a blanket of stars. To be an elder, trusted, listened to, honored for what you carry. The warmth of the fire on your skin, the rhythm of drums and feet in your bones, the taste of smoke in the air. There's something almost sacred here, in the way that time stretches and folds in upon itself. The stories told tonight were told 1,000 years ago, and will be told 1,000 years from now, if the chain is not broken. Every song, every gesture, every ritual act is a kind of prayer, a way of saying, we are here, we remember, we belong. And perhaps, just perhaps, this is what we are missing most in the modern world. Not the fire itself, but the gathering. Not the story, but the telling. Not the ritual, but the sense of being part of something larger. Something that began long before we were born, and will continue long after we are gone. The fire burns low. The youngest children are carried to bed, or curl up on mats near their parents. The stories become fewer, the songs softer. Someone stirs the embers, adding a single log, watching the way the flames leap and settle. The night is thick and quiet, the darkness outside the circle absolute. But inside, there is warmth and memory and the unbroken thread of tradition. Here's something that should bother you more than it probably does. Most of us in the modern world have never known this kind of night. We have electric lights, screens, endless distraction. We have lost the rhythm of gathering, of slowing down, of surrendering to the darkness and to each other. The loss is subtle, but profound. But this too can be reclaimed. The next time you find yourself around a fire, or even a candle, try this. Turn off your phone, listen to the voices around you. Let the stories unfold. Notice how time slows, how your mind opens, how the boundaries between self and other begin to blur. The firelight hours are not just a relic of the past. They are an invitation, a way back to something ancient, something necessary, something we carry in our bones. As the embers fade and the last stories drift into silence, we come to a threshold. The fire has done its work, warming, illuminating, binding. The people gathered here are changed, if only for a night. The children will remember the stories, the songs, the feeling of belonging. The elders will sleep knowing their memory endures, if only for a little longer. And as the fire burns low, as one by one the people drift towards sleep, the circle dissolves. The darkness returns, but it is no longer frightening. It is full of memory, of meaning, of promise. This is the gift of the firelight hours, a sense of connection, of continuity, of being part of something vast and unbroken, a knowledge that we are not alone, that we never were. And so, as the stories end and the songs fade, we come to the night itself, to the hush of sleep, and the question of how our ancestors met the darkness when the fire was only embers, and the world was still and waiting. But that is a story for another hour. For now, let the memory of firelight warm you, as it has warmed countless generations before. The night is long, but the chain is unbroken. We are gathered here together, around the oldest fire of all. Picture this. The last embers of the fire are fading, their glow paling against the vast, enveloping dark. The camp is settling into sleep. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and earth. The gentle hush broken only by the soft shuffling of bodies finding comfort. The breath of sleepers, the distant cry of a night bird. You are lying close to others, family, friends, kin. Your body pressed against woven mats or animal skins, the warmth of the group a shield against the chill of the night. The world outside the circle of sleepers is black and absolute, a darkness so deep it feels ancient, primordial. For a moment, you are aware of the silence, the true silence of a world before machines, before cities, before the restless hum of electricity. And as the night deepens, the anxiety that sometimes comes with darkness dissolves in the closeness of bodies. You are safe here, attended by the presence of others, the knowledge that watchful eyes have always guarded the sleeping camp. The dangers of the wild are real, but they are kept at bay not by walls or weapons, but by the simple act of sleeping together, of sharing the night. Here's the thing. Our modern experience of night is nothing like this. We imagine darkness as a void, a gap to be filled with light, with entertainment, with activity. But for the vast majority of human history, night was a time of surrender, of letting go, of drifting into another world. The boundary between waking and sleeping, between day and night, was softer, more permeable. In the quiet hours when the world was still, something remarkable happened. For centuries, for millennia, human sleep was not a single unbroken stretch. It was divided, split like the night itself, into two parts. This is the pattern called biphasic sleep. The first sleep, deep and restorative, would begin not long after dusk. Sometime after midnight, for an hour or two, sometimes more, people would wake. Not fully awake, not as we are in the bright pulse of modern life, but in a state of gentle alertness, halfway between worlds. This wakeful interval was followed by the second sleep, which carried people into the hours before dawn. Think about that for a moment. The idea of a single, continuous 8-hour rest is a modern invention, an artifact of artificial light and regimented schedules. Before the advent of electric lighting, before even the widespread use of candles and oil lamps, the natural rhythm of human sleep followed the rhythm of darkness. Roger Ekirch, a historian at Virginia Tech, spent years combing through diaries, court records, medical texts, and letters. He discovered over 500 references across centuries and cultures to first sleep and second sleep. The evidence is written into the language itself. First sleep, dead sleep, morning sleep. People knew the difference. They named it, marked it, lived by it. And this is where it gets really interesting. When researchers have taken people out of the modern world, removed artificial light, set them in natural darkness, biphasic sleep patterns almost always reappear. In one famous experiment, people placed in a dark environment for 14 hours each night for several weeks began to sleep in two distinct segments, separated by a period of wakefulness. No instruction, no suggestion, just darkness, and the human brain remembers the old way. The answer is complicated, but the pattern repeats. In traditional societies today where artificial light is scarce, we still see flexible, variable sleep. The Hadza of Tanzania, for example, a group living much as our Paleolithic ancestors did, sleep an average of 6.5 hours per night. But this number hides enormous variation. Some nights are longer, some are shorter. Sleep is rarely unbroken. People wake frequently, sometimes to check on children, sometimes to tend the fire, sometimes just to sit and think. Over the course of the night, the group as a whole is never entirely asleep, nor entirely awake. There is always someone watching, someone stirring, someone dreaming. This is what makes the ancient night so fascinating. It was never absolute, never fixed. It was a shifting landscape of rest and wakefulness, of solitude and togetherness, of dreams and reflection. The pattern is written in our bodies. The hormone melatonin, which governs sleep, rises and falls with the darkness. Cortisol, the stress hormone, drops in the presence of trusted others. Studies of communal sleeping arrangements in monasteries, in traditional huts, even among children at summer camp, show a measurable reduction in cortisol and a rise in oxytocin, the hormone of bonding and trust. The body knows when it is safe. The mind can rest. And so, as the camp settles into night, something beautiful happens. People drift into the first sleep, lulled by warmth and closeness, by the fading stories and the hush of darkness. For several hours, the brain descends into the deepest stages of rest, slow waves, heavy breathing, the body repairing itself, the mind letting go. The outside world disappears. But then, in the middle of the night, the veil lifts. In the quiet hours, one by one, people stir. Not everyone at once. Sleep is staggered, individual, but overlapping. Some roll over, gaze into the dying embers of the fire, and slip back into dreams. Others sit up quietly, so as not to disturb the sleepers. A mother nurses her infant. Two lovers, pressed together under a shared hide, whisper softly, voices barely above breath. Someone rises to add a stick to the fire, watching the sparks swirl upward. The air is cool, sometimes cold. The darkness outside the shelter is absolute. But here, within the small circle of light, life continues. What did people do in these hours of night wakefulness? The answer is both simple and profound. They talked, quietly sharing secrets, worries, dreams that would feel too fragile in the harsh light of day. They made love in the privacy granted by darkness and the hush of sleeping others. They prayed, meditated, reflected. Some rose to relieve themselves, to check on the animals, to listen to the sounds of the night. In some cultures, these hours were considered the best time for creativity, for problem solving, for seeking inspiration. The boundary between dream and waking was thin. The mind, unmoored from the day's demands, drifted easily from thought to vision, from memory to imagination. Here's the thing. In these hours, the world was different. Time slowed. The obligations of the day, work, gathering, hunting, making, tending, fell away. What remained was intimacy, safety, the feeling of being held, not just by the bodies around you, but by the darkness itself, by the rhythm of a life lived in tune with the night. Some researchers think that this pattern sleep, waking, sleep, again, was adaptive. The wakeful interval, they argue, allowed people to keep watch, to protect the group from danger, to tend the fire, to respond to the needs of children or the sick. Others suggest a social function. These hours were private, protected, a time for relationships to deepen, away from the scrutiny of the larger group. Still others see something spiritual, even mystical, in the night wakefulness. A time when the veil between worlds was thin, when dreams and visions could be received, interpreted, shared. Compare that to our own nights. When we wake in the darkness today, we reach for our phones, turn on a light, try to force ourselves back to sleep. We panic, thinking something is wrong. But maybe, just maybe, these hours are not a disorder at all, but an echo of something ancient. A memory of how we once lived, how we once dreamed. Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. The communal aspect of sleep, the way people gathered together, huddled for warmth and safety, is not just a matter of practicality. It shapes the mind, the body, the spirit. In traditional societies, sleeping alone is rare, often reserved for the very old, or those in mourning. The group sleeps together, sometimes in a single room, sometimes under a shared roof, sometimes in a circle around a dying fire. Children pressed against parents, siblings tangled together, elders at the edge, always watching. The scent of others, the murmur of breath, the gentle rhythm of bodies shifting in the dark, these are the sounds of safety. Modern science bears this out. Studies have shown that communal sleeping lowers stress, reduces the frequency of nightmares, and increases levels of oxytocin. In one study of traditional societies, groups that slept together experienced a marked reduction in nighttime cortisol, the hormone associated with fear and anxiety. Another study, measuring brain waves and hormone levels, found that even brief periods of communal napping increased feelings of trust and belonging. The body knows, even when the mind forgets. But that's just the beginning. The night was also a time of dreams. And in the world of our ancestors, dreams were not meaningless, random flickers of the sleeping brain. They were messages, omens, stories in their own right. For many ancient peoples, the line between dream and waking was porous, uncertain. What you saw in the night could shape what you did in the day. A dream might warn of danger, offer guidance, reveal the will of the spirits or the ancestors. Some societies kept dream-sharing circles, gathering in the dawn to recount and interpret the night's visions. Others believed that the soul traveled during sleep, visiting other worlds, speaking to the dead, communing with gods. The honest answer is that we don't know exactly how prehistoric people understood dreams. The evidence is fragmentary, suggestive, open to interpretation. But what we do know is that the experience of sleep, the descent into darkness, the emergence into dream, the return to waking was never just biological. It was cultural, social, spiritual. The night was a landscape as real and as complex as the world of day. In the quiet hours, as you drift in and out of sleep, you are not alone. You are surrounded by the breathing bodies of your kin, the warmth of the group, the flicker of firelight on the walls. Above you, if you dare to step outside, the sky is a vault of stars, more stars than you have ever seen, more than you can count. In the absence of artificial light, the night sky is overwhelming. The Milky Way is a river of light, a pathway across the heavens. Constellations blaze in their fullness, undimmed by city glow. And as the night deepens, the stars become companions, guides, markers of time and space. For our ancestors, the sky was a map. The movement of stars and planets marked the passing of seasons, the time to plant and harvest, the time to move with the herds. The Pleiades, the seven sisters, are among the oldest named constellations in human history. Their image appears in the cave paintings of Lascaux, drawn some 17,000 years ago. Think about that. For at least 17 millennia, humans have looked up that tight cluster of stars and seen a pattern, a story, a sign. The evidence is compelling. In the Lascaux caves of southwestern France, among the paintings of bulls, deer, and horses, there is a cluster of dots above the shoulder of a great aurochs. Some researchers believe this cluster represents the Pleiades, echoing the same constellation recognized by Greeks, Persians, Chinese, and Native Americans thousands of years later. If true, it suggests that the night sky has been a source of wonder and meaning for as long as art itself. What does this mean for us? It means that the hours of darkness were never empty. They were filled with sleep, with dreams, with quiet conversation, with the slow, patient watching of the stars. The night was not a void, but a canvas, a place for imagination, for connection, for reflection. In the quiet hours, the group is never fully asleep, never fully awake. Some watch the stars, mapping their slow movement across the sky. Others tend the fire, keeping the embers alive until dawn. Someone whispers a story, half dream, half memory. A child stirs, comforted by the presence of a parent, slips back into sleep. The world is held together by these small acts of care, of vigilance, of love. Some researchers think that this pattern of staggered sleep, of wakefulness in the night, served a practical purpose. In a world full of predators, of danger, of uncertainty, the group could never afford to be entirely unconscious. The Hadza, for example, show a remarkable pattern. At any given hour of the night, only about 20% of the group is in the deepest stage of sleep. The rest are lighter sleepers, or quietly awake, or just drifting in and out. It is almost as if the group itself is a single organism, always partly watchful, always partly at rest. But here's what's really fascinating. The night was also a time for the mind to wander, to imagine, to create. In the darkness, when the senses are muted and the world is still, the brain is free to roam. Dreams take on special power. In many traditional societies, dreams are not private, but communal, shared, discussed, interpreted. A dream of danger might lead to a change in plans. A dream of abundance might signal a time to celebrate. The group, in its collective wisdom, makes meaning from the visions of the night. Compare that to the modern world. How often do we share our dreams, or even remember them? How often do we sit in the darkness without distraction and simply let our minds drift? The electric light has banished the night, not just the darkness, but the mystery, the possibility, the slow unfolding of thought. The evidence is written in the body. In studies where people are deprived of artificial light, given only the sun and the fire, their bodies quickly revert to the old pattern. Within 3 weeks, biphasic sleep emerges. People sleep in 2 segments, with a period of quiet wakefulness in between. They report feeling more rested, less anxious, more connected to those around them. The body, it seems, remembers what the mind has forgotten. But that was just the beginning. The night was also a time of learning. The stars were a textbook, a calendar, a clock. The positions of constellations told when to travel, when to plant, when to prepare for winter. In the southern hemisphere, the Hadza used the rising of specific stars to time their hunting expeditions. Among the San of southern Africa, stories about the stars are passed from one generation to the next, stories that encode knowledge about waterholes, animal migrations, the turning of the seasons. And this is where it gets really interesting. The sky is not just a map, but a storybook. The myths and legends woven around the stars are some of the oldest stories we have. In the Australian desert, the Yolngu people tell of the 7 sisters chased across the sky by a hunter, a story that mirrors the Greek myth of Orion and the Pleiades. Across continents and millennia, the same patterns reappear. The night, it seems, speaks a universal language. The honest answer is that we don't know exactly what was lost when the night was broken, when artificial light spread, when sleep became solitary, when dreams lost their power. We know only that something vanished. The deep sense of safety that comes from sleeping with others, the slow, gentle rhythm of rest and waking, the meaning found in dreams, in stories, in the watching of stars. What does this mean for us? It means that the night is not something to be feared, but something to be reclaimed. The darkness is not empty, but full of memory, of possibility, of connection. In the quiet hours, when the world is still, we can remember who we are. We are creatures of the day, yes, but we are also children of the night. The stories we tell, the dreams we dream, the bonds we forge, these are the gifts of darkness. Think about what that means. For tens of thousands of years, the night was a time of safety, of intimacy, of discovery. We slept together, we dreamed together, we watched the stars together. The darkness was not our enemy but our companion. And as the night deepens, the camp is quiet. The fire is low but not out. The stars wheel overhead, silent and eternal. Somewhere a child dreams of running with wild horses. An elder remembers a story from childhood, a lesson written in the sky. Lovers hold each other, breathing in time. The group drifts between waking and sleep, between dream and memory, held in the gentle arms of the night. This is what was lost when we banished darkness, when we made the night bright and solitary, when we forgot how to rest, how to dream, how to belong. But perhaps in remembering, we can reclaim some small piece of it. The next time you wake in the darkness, remember, you are not alone. You are part of an unbroken chain, stretching back to the first sleepers, the first dreamers, the first watchers of stars. In the quiet hours, as the world holds its breath before dawn, we become most human. Vulnerable, connected, full of wonder. The night is not just a backdrop to our lives, but a partner, a teacher, a friend. And as the night deepens, the rhythm of sleep and waking, of dream and reflection carries the group toward morning. The fire stirs, someone rises to tend it. The first birds begin to call. The sky lightens, the stars fade, and the world is reborn. A full cycle is complete. Day has followed night, rest has followed labor, dream has followed waking. The camp will stir again, slowly, gently, each person carrying the memory of the night with them into the light. But of course, not every night was so peaceful. Not every day was so safe. There were dangers, losses, sorrows, the things we rarely speak of, but that were as much a part of ancient life as the warmth of the fire or the hush of sleep. That, too, is part of the story, and it is where we must turn next. Now, if you've been paying attention, you might be thinking this all sounds too idyllic. Picture perfect afternoons of crafting, evenings of story and song, peaceful nights under the stars. Could life for early humans really have been so gentle, so free from fear, so full of ease? Surely there must have been hardship, danger, sorrow. Surely there were dark days as well as golden ones. And you're right to question. The reality is more complicated, more sobering in some ways, but also more deeply human. Let's begin with something both haunting and universal: the fragility of childhood. In the Paleolithic world, every birth was a hope balanced on a knife's edge. The evidence tells a more nuanced story than our romantic images of carefree children at play. Recent studies of ancient skeletons from sites scattered across Africa, Europe, and Asia reveal a staggering pattern. As many as 30 to 50% of all children died before reaching the age of 5. Think about that for a moment. In some seasons, in some years, a mother might bury more children than she raised. The ache of loss, the small graves, the quiet mourning was woven into the fabric of daily life. Life expectancy at birth hovered around 30 years. But here's what's important to understand. This number is shaped by high infant and child mortality. For those who made it through the dangerous early years, the picture softens. Archaeological evidence, teeth, bones, burial sites shows that adults who survived childhood often lived into their 60s, even 70s. Elders were not rare. They carried memories, stories, skills, living libraries for their people. But not all dangers were silent or slow. In a world without antibiotics or surgery, injury and illness could strike with devastating finality. Imagine a twisted ankle on a rocky slope, a deep cut from a flint blade, a tooth infection, or a sudden fever. Any of these could turn fatal. A simple broken leg, something we would fix in a hospital today, could mean weeks of immobility, exposure, hunger, predation. And yet, the bones tell an even more remarkable, almost tender story. Paleolithic skeletons often show healed fractures, broken arms, legs, even spines that mended over time. These injuries didn't heal by magic. They healed because someone cared. Someone brought food, kept watch, helped with daily needs. Early humans did not abandon their wounded. They adapted, invented, and supported each other in the face of adversity. The pattern repeats. Hardship, yes, but also resilience and solidarity. Disease, too, was a constant shadow. Without written records, We can only infer the toll from the marks left on ancient teeth and bones, signs of malnutrition, infections, chronic stress. Yet here, the honest answer is that we don't know exactly how frequent or deadly outbreaks were. Some pathogens thrived only with the close quarters of settled villages. So many of the plagues familiar to us now, measles, smallpox, influenza, were unknown to Paleolithic bands. But parasites, wounds, and fevers were facts of life, sometimes ending it too soon. Then there's the question of food. The vision of endless abundance, ripe berries, fat game, rivers teeming with fish was true in some seasons, in some places. But environments shift, and so do fortunes. In the depths of winter, or during drought, even skilled foragers could face hunger. Some years the herds moved early or the nuts failed to ripen. The archaeological record is clear. Bones from ancient campsites show periods of scarcity, sometimes even malnutrition. But here's what's really fascinating. The solution was not to hunker in place and hope for the best. Early humans were masters of movement. They practiced what anthropologists call seasonal rounds, migrating between resource patches, following the rhythms of ripening plants and migrating animals. A group might travel dozens, even hundreds of miles in a year, always searching for the next abundance. Scarcity was real, but it was rarely endured passively. The world was unpredictable, so people became experts at reading its signs. What about violence? Here, modern imagination often runs wild, picturing a world of constant warfare, every stranger a threat, every encounter a potential massacre. The evidence tells a more nuanced story. Archaeological surveys of hundreds of Paleolithic skeletons spanning tens of thousands of years reveal something surprising. Less than 2% show signs of trauma from violence, arrowheads embedded in bone, skull fractures from blows, defensive wounds. Compare that to later eras, after the rise of agriculture, when mass graves and fortifications become common. This is what makes the Paleolithic so remarkable. While conflict and interpersonal violence certainly happened, the scale and frequency appear much lower than often assumed. Small groups, constantly moving, with room to avoid or negotiate rather than fight. This was the pattern, more often than not. Of course, there were exceptions. Some burials show evidence of massacre or of individuals killed by others. The honest answer is that we may never know the full context, feuds, accidents, rituals, or something else entirely. But the best estimates, grounded in numbers, suggest that Paleolithic life was not, on the whole, a Hobbesian war of all against all. So where does this leave us? With a picture that is neither golden nor grim but balanced, human in all its complexity. The dangers were real. The losses were real. The world was not always gentle. And yet, despite all this, the rhythm of daily life was different from what we might expect. Work was still intermittent. Social bonds, creativity, ritual, and rest filled the hours between hardship and danger. The group adapted, supported, and remembered. But here's what's important to understand. These hardships did not erase the meaning or richness of life. They shaped it. They made solidarity essential, made every lull between crises precious. When a child survived, when a wound healed, when a lean season ended, the relief was profound. The very fact that people endured generation after generation for tens of thousands of years speaks to the strength of their ways. The exceptions reveal the larger pattern. Even in a world shadowed by loss, the pursuit of beauty, the making of art, the telling of stories, the sharing of food and fire, these never disappeared. They were not luxuries, but necessities. They were how people made sense of sorrow, how they found joy even in uncertainty. The mystery remains unsolved. Why did some groups thrive while others vanished? Why do some stories end and others endure? The answer is complicated, and we may never know for certain. But the evidence is clear. Despite the dangers, despite the sorrow, the rhythm of Paleolithic life was not constant struggle. It was not an endless, desperate fight for survival. It was a dance, sometimes slow, sometimes hurried, between hardship and abundance, fear and joy, darkness and firelight. With a more complete and honest picture, we can now reflect on what this means for us today. How we balance our own joys and sorrows. How we remember what it means to live together in all the fullness of our humanity. So what do we make of all this? After wandering through the quiet hours of ancient camps, listening to the hush and the hum of lives so distant yet so familiar, what remains? What does it mean to know that our ancestors 10,000 years ago or 50,000 lived not just in struggle, but in rhythm, in creativity, in the company of others. Here's the thing. The more we learn, the more the old story of constant toil and fear dissolves. In its place, a more complicated and perhaps more comforting picture emerges. Think about this for a moment. The bones, the tools, the art on cave walls, all the evidence points to something quietly radical. The people of the Paleolithic were us. Not almost us, not some primitive prototype. Our genome is essentially unchanged for 50,000 years. If you brought a child from those distant nights into our world, raised them here, they would learn, laugh, love, and dream just as we do. Every capacity for joy, for play, for wonder that lives in us because it lived in them. And yet here's what's really puzzling. With all our progress, all our technology, the promise was always more freedom, more leisure, more happiness. But the numbers tell a different story. The average American today spends about 11 hours a day with screens, phones, computers, televisions. Work hours have not shrunk as we imagined they would. In fact, by some measures, modern Americans work more than medieval peasants, who often had around 150 feast days off each year. That's nearly one day in every 3 devoted not to labor, but to rest, to celebration, to simply being together. Compare that to our present. The pace is relentless. The boundaries between work and rest blur, dissolve. We are always reachable, always accountable, always busy. And yet, rates of loneliness and depression are highest not in the poorest places but in the most developed nations, the places with the most screens, the most convenience, the most progress. The paradox is haunting. This is what makes the story of our ancestors so compelling. They were not immune to hardship, but they organized their days around connection, not consumption. Their lives were filled with long conversations, slow mornings, creation for its own sake. Think of the hours spent on a necklace of shell beads, or a painting deep within a cave, meant only for the eyes of a few. Or perhaps only for the spirits. These were acts of leisure, of beauty, of meaning beyond mere survival. Now here's where it gets really interesting. All those capacities, rest, creation, belonging have not disappeared. They are not lost to us, not really. They are frozen, perhaps, beneath the surface of our busy days, preserved in our bodies, in our minds, in the deep architecture of our dreams. We are, in every biological sense, Paleolithic people living in a world that moves at breakneck speed. The mismatch is profound, but that's just the beginning. The lesson is not to abandon the modern world, but to remember what is possible. What if we reclaimed slower mornings, longer conversations, time for creation without purpose? What if we allowed ourselves to gather, to rest, to step away from the relentless glow of screens and return, if only for a few moments, to the rhythm of our ancestors? These are not luxuries, they are necessities, written into the blueprint of our bodies and minds. You are part of this story. The unbroken chain of humanity stretches from the first storytellers around the fire to you, listening in the hush of night. Every breath, every heartbeat, every longing for rest or company or beauty is a thread that ties you to all those who came before. You are not alone in your hopes, your fears, your dreams. The same patterns repeat, echoing across the ages. And sleep is the oldest ritual of all. For tens of thousands of years, it has marked the boundary between day and night, between effort and surrender, between what can be controlled and what must be released. The fire burns low, the voice is quiet, and the group surrenders to the dark, trusting in each other, in the world, in the promise of another dawn. That ritual has never changed, not in its essence. No matter how much the world transforms, the need for rest, for peace, for the slow drift into dreams remains. Think about what that means. So as you prepare for your own journey into sleep, remember, you do not enter the night alone. Whether you're watching from the heart of a crowded city, where lights never truly fade, or from a quiet countryside where darkness still belongs to the stars, you are participating in an ancient tradition. The act of resting, of letting go, is itself a form of connection to your own body, to those you love, to a lineage stretching back beyond memory. The night is not empty. It is full of memory, of possibility, of all the sleepers who came before you. Their dreams made our world. Yours will shape what comes next. Let these mysteries stay with you, gentle and unresolved. Let the knowledge of your place in this vast story bring you peace. The firelight hours live on, in every slow breath, in every quiet moment, in every dream. Sleep well.